America. With my voice and my vote, with a plea to all of you, Democrats and Republicans, I ask you to search your souls and answer these questions. Is the president's war on democracy in keeping with the Constitution? Were his words an insurrectionary mob a high crime and misdemeanor? Do we not have the duty to our oath to do all we constitutionally can to protect our nation and our democracy from the appetites and ambitions of a man who has self-evidently demonstrated that he is a vital threat to liberty, to self-government, and to the rule of law? Our country is divided, we all know that. There are lies abroad in the land spread by a desperate president who feels his power slipping away. We know that too. But I know this as well, that we here in this House have a sacred obligation to stand for truth, to stand up for the Constitution, to stand as guardians of the Republic. In a speech he was prepared to give in Dallas on Friday, November 22nd, 1963, President John F. Kennedy was to say, "We in this country, in this generation, are, by destiny rather than choice, the watchmen on the walls of world freedom. We ask, therefore, that we may be worthy of our power and responsibility." That we may be worthy. President Kennedy was assassinated before he could deliver those words to the nation, but they resonate more even now, in our time, in this place. Let us be worthy of our power and responsibility, that what Lincoln thought was the world's last best hope, the United States of America, may long survive. My fellow members, my fellow Americans, we cannot escape history. Let us embrace our duty, fulfill our oath, and honor the trust of our nation. And we pray that God will continue to bless America. I thank you, Madam Speaker, and yield back.
The gentleman from New York, reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. 19 minutes. 19 minutes. 4 years ago on Inauguration Day, January 20th, 2017, 19 minutes into President Trump's administration, at 12:19 p.m., the Washington Post headline was, "Campaign to impeach President Trump has begun." And now, with just 1 week left, they're still trying. In 7 days, there will be a peaceful transfer of power, just like there has been every other time in our country. But Democrats are going to impeach President Trump again. This doesn't unite the country. There's no way this helps the nation deal with the tragic and terrible events of last week that we all condemn. And Republicans have been consistent. We've condemned all the violence all the time. We condemned it last summer. We condemned it last week. We should be focused on bringing the nation together. Instead, Democrats are going to impeach the president for a second time 1 week before he leaves office. Why? Why? Politics and the fact that they want to cancel the president. The president who cut taxes, the president who reduced regulations, the president prior to COVID had the greatest economy, lowest unemployment in 50 years, the president who got us out of the Iran deal, put the embassy in Jerusalem, brought hostages home from North Korea, put 3 great justices on the Supreme Court, gave us a new NAFTA agreement, the Abraham Accords, the COVID vaccine, and who built the wall. It's about politics. This is about getting the President of the United States. They spied on his campaign before he was elected. 19 minutes into his presidency, they started the impeachment push. 3-year Mueller investigation, 19 lawyers, 40 agents, 500 witnesses, 2,500 subpoenas, $40 million to find nothing. Impeachment round 1 based on an anonymous whistleblower with no firsthand knowledge who was biased against the president and who worked for Joe Biden. And now it's impeachment round 2. It's always been about getting the president no matter what. It's an obsession that is now broadened. It's not just about impeachment anymore. It's about canceling, as I've said. Canceling the president and anyone that disagrees with them. The Ayatollah can tweet, the president can't. Democrats can object on January 6, 2017, but Republicans aren't allowed to object on January 6, 2021. Democrats say Antifa is a myth. Republicans condemn all violence all the time. The double standard has to stop. And frankly, the attack on the First Amendment has to stop. And stop and think about it. Do you have a functioning First Amendment when the cancel culture only allows one side to talk? When you can't even have a debate in this country, this great country, the greatest country ever? It needs to stop, because if it continues, it won't just be Republicans who get canceled. It won't just be the President of the United States. The cancel culture will come for us all. Right. America's a great country, the greatest country ever. It seems to me that we need to think about how great the people of this nation really are. Think about what we've accomplished in the past and begin to come together as leaders who represent so many great folks across our districts. Think about this. Think about this. In 1903, in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, two guys fly this thing they called a plane 100 feet. Barely got off the ground. Barely got off the ground. Amazing thing. 44 years later, Chuck Yeager breaks the sound barrier. In 44 years, we go from two guys flying a contraption they called a plane a few hundred feet to Chuck Yeager breaking the sound barrier. And 22 years after that, another American steps on the moon. Think about it. In one lifetime, in 66 years, two guys flying 100 feet to putting a man on the moon. That's what this country is capable of. That's what we can do. And we, as the Congress who represent the people who did that, should start leading, should start understanding what really is going on here. So I hope we defeat this. I hope we can begin to come together and recognize the greatness of the American people and focus on the things they want us to focus on. I yield back our time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself 3 minutes.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 3 minutes.
Madam Speaker, we all saw it coming. Months in advance, President Trump was baselessly and deliberately whipping his supporters into a frenzy. Weeks before the riot, he used his bully pulpit to spread lies about the election. He told his supporters that the results were fraudulent. He implored them again and again to help him stay in power. And he convinced them that accepting the outcome of the election posed an existential threat to their families and their freedoms. We have a duty to observe, Madam Speaker, that racism played a direct role in this incitement. The president's violent rhetoric is always at its most fevered pitch when he is talking about the civil rights and civic aspirations of Black Americans and other minority communities. On January 6th, at a rally that was large, angry, and widely reported to be armed, the president's lies and violent rhetoric reached their crescendo. At that rally, the president took the stage. After reiterating the falsehood that we won this election, and we won it by a landslide, he told the crowd that if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. And then he urged the mob to walk down Pennsylvania Avenue to prevent the Congress from confirming the election of an illegitimate president. On that day, President Trump unleashed the force of a mob on this, the people's house. He encouraged that attack with the explicit intent to disrupt the joint session of Congress, an attack that threatened the safety of the Vice President, the Speaker of the House, and the President pro tem of the Senate, the next three officers in the line of succession. And look at what that violence has wrought. At least 6 dead, offices ransacked, the sanctity of our Capitol breached for the first time in 2 centuries. Our hallways littered with broken glass, the battle flags of a long-dead Confederacy, and the debris we have come to associate with the Trump campaign. Madam Speaker, I have faith in the resiliency of our government. We will bring the rioters to justice. Their accomplices in this House will be held responsible. But today, we must focus on the gravest threat first. President Trump, who incited this riot and who remains a grave danger to the nation. As we warned the Senate when we tried him for his first impeachment, President Trump has made clear in word and deed that he will persist in such conduct if he is not removed from power. He poses a continuing threat to our nation, to the integrity of our elections, and to our democratic order. He must not remain in power one moment longer. Not one moment longer. The danger is too great. We must impeach. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. McClellan.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 2 minutes. The gentleman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
We'll go 4 minutes. Excuse me. I didn't realize that.
The gentleman from Ohio, in control of the time on that side of the aisle, wishes to yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from California. Correct?
Yes.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, I didn't like the president's speech on January 6th either. I thought he was wrong to assert that the vice president in Congress can pick and choose which electoral votes to count. He was wrong to set such a confrontational tone in a politically tense situation. But what did he actually say? His exact words were, quote, "I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard," unquote. That's impeachable? That's called freedom of speech. Now, he also threatened to oppose candidates in future elections. And by the way, that was directed at Republicans like me who'd resolved to uphold the constitutional process and protect the Electoral College. Well, so what? That's called politics. If we impeached every politician who gave a fiery speech to a crowd of partisans, this Capitol would be deserted. That's what the president did. That is all he did. He specifically told the crowd to protest peacefully and patriotically, and the vast majority of them did. But every movement has a lunatic fringe. Suppressing free speech is not the answer. Holding rioters accountable for their actions is the answer. And we are. And if we'd prosecuted BLM and Antifa rioters across the country with the same determination these last 6 months, this incident may not have happened at all. Now, short of declaring war, the power of impeachment is the most solemn and consequential act that Congress can take. To use it in this manner, in the heat of the moment, with no hearings, no due process, many members phoning in their votes after a hastily called debate, exactly 1 week before a new president is to take office, trivializes this power to the point of caricature. The Democrats have won everything in sight: the House, the Senate, and the presidency. In a republic, that calls for magnanimity by the victors. Only in a banana republic does it call for vengeance. Benjamin Franklin warned us that passion governs, and she never governs wisely. In our passions this week, we've set some dangerous new precedents that will haunt us for years to come. Yesterday, we redefined intemperate speech as a physical incapacity requiring removal from office. Today, we define it as a high crime and misdemeanor. Well, the moment any member of this body gives an impassioned speech and the lunatic fringe of their movement takes license from it, be prepared to answer to this new precedent that we established today. Now, I could cite plenty of provocative speeches made by Democrats that directly preceded violence this summer, but we've already had enough of that. You know, after 600,000 Americans had perished in the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln appealed to the better angels of our nature. He said, "With malice toward none, with charity for all, let us bind up the nation's wounds." Those words were so important to the unity of our nation, they're inscribed in marble at the Lincoln Memorial. I cannot think of a more petty, vindictive, and gratuitous act than to impeach an already defeated president a week before he is to leave office. President-elect Biden's promise to heal the nation becomes a hollow mockery in the harsh reality of this unconstitutional act. God help our country.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Good job, Tommy.
The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
And now yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Lofgren.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I'm the only member of Congress who's been involved in all 3 of the last presidential impeachments. Those were long proceedings. Today, we don't need a long investigation to know the president incited right-wing terrorists to attack the Congress to try to overturn constitutional government. The actions were in public, plain as day. His actions are the most serious offense against our Constitution and our country. They are impeachable acts. The founders devised the impeachment clause to protect against a president who would threaten constitutional order. If we don't act now, the impeachment clause would essentially be meaningless. Faced with these facts, if we don't impeach to protect our country, we will fail our own oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and, yes, domestic. We have no choice. We must impeach.
Time has expired.
God bless America.
The gentleman from New York reserves.
I reserve.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs.
The gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 2 minutes.
It is with wariness and a certain unhealthy, morbid curiosity that I watched the beast attempt to devour President Donald J. Trump again. The craving to crush President Trump has never been satisfied, not through investigations, not through false allegations, and not even through an impeachment that was wholly without merit. And the timing of this impeachment makes little sense. Your candidate will take office in a few hours, and President Trump will relinquish the levers of power to President-elect Biden. But your craving was never a Biden victory, nor was it even a Trump defeat. You believe that your hunger will be finally satiated by impeaching this president without completion of his full term of office. You don't merely seek victory, but you seek obliteration of your nemesis. The thirst for Trump's destruction will not be slaked, however, even if you're successful today and were the Senate to convict President Trump. Yours will be a Pyrrhic victory, for instead of stopping the Trump train, his movement will grow stronger, for you will have made him a martyr. Surely you are aware of this, and that is why your allies in the media seek to censor conservative voices. Your chums that sit on the boards of corporate America, yes, the same companies that the left vilifies, promise to starve Republicans from receiving their PAC donations. But I bet that the groundswell of support for President Trump and his policies will not go away. You see, the movement he started is based on building an incredibly robust economy on a foundation of lower taxes and fewer regulations that has the wonderful effect of putting more people to work than ever. It is built upon a strong military that is extricated from endless wars. It provides border security, America First trade agreements, Mideast peace and stability. Those are the things the American people want. Your four-year appetite will be temporarily assuaged, while you will no doubt continue to chase after leaders of this movement. But your appetite will be unfulfilled. I urge you, please do not, and I'm mixing metaphors here, attempt to douse the remaining burning embers of this movement with gasoline. No one wants that. I urge you, please, to reconsider the reckless action in which you engaged today.
The gentleman's time has
I yield.
expired. The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
1 week ago, the president incited an insurrection against Congress to prevent the peaceful transition of power. It was the most dangerous moment for our democracy in a century. Today, we invoke the remedy the founders provided for just such a lawless president, impeachment. More important, today we begin the long road to restoration. America has been through a civil war, world wars, a Great Depression, pandemics, McCarthyism, and now a Trumpist and white nationalist insurrection. And yet our democracy endures. It endures because at every juncture, every pivotal moment, when evil threatened to overtake good, patriotic Americans stepped forward to say, enough. This is one of those moments. To preserve this sacred place, this citadel of democracy for ourselves and for posterity, let us say, enough. Enough. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gohmert.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
Here's a quote. I just don't even know why there aren't more uprisings all over the country, and maybe there will be. Or, sadly, the domestic enemies of our voting system and honoring our Constitution are right at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue with their allies in Congress of the United States. We were called enemies of the state. Those are all quotes from our speaker. Now, on our side, we didn't take those to be impeachable because we didn't believe she surely meant that. But by the Democrats taking this action, you're telling me, no, when we say those, we actually mean to incite violence. That's what this action is saying. Look, I just looked on the History Channel. It says these words: if the Judiciary Committee, talking about impeachment, finds sufficient grounds, its members write and pass articles of impeachment, which then go to the full House for a vote. Half of all the impeachments ever conducted, ever voted for, occurred under this speaker. You're setting a precedent that says very clearly, because this impeachment isn't going to work, but it is setting the precedent. Unlike a year ago when we said, look, it shouldn't go through Intel, it should go through Judiciary Committee. Forget that. Now the message is, if you have a whim and you want to just go after a president, just go straight to the floor. No investigation, no Judiciary Committee. Go straight to the floor. Use it as a political weapon as you wish. This is so dangerous, what you're doing. Forgetting all the precedents. Yes, we can argue back and forth, but you're using this as a weapon, and you're destroying this little experiment in self-government. In a year's time,
The gentleman's time has expired.
it needs
The
to
gentleman
stop. I yield back.
The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Massachusetts, Ms. Clark.
The gentlewoman from Massachusetts is recognized for 1 minute.
Suffragist and abolitionist Lucy Stone stated, "If we speak the truth fearlessly, we shall add to our number those who will turn the scale to the side of equal and full justice in all things." The truth is, President Trump incited a violent attack against the United States government. The truth is, President Trump spent his presidency inflaming hate, white supremacy, anti-Semitism, and violence. The truth is, he was enabled by all those who perpetuated the lie that the most secure election in our nation's history was stolen. The truth is that these seditious actions left 5 dead, our Capitol besieged, our security threatened, and our democracy hanging in the balance. And the truth is, a vote to impeach is our resounding declaration that the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
The gentleman from New York wishes to reserve.
Reserve.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, Mr. Rice.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The last speaker said that for 4 years, the president did all these terrible, insightful things, including anti-Semitism. I take exception with that, but I think it's important that we embrace one thing that was said. Yes, the president has been consistent for the last 4 years. During his campaign, I even, representing another candidate, said that the president had political Tourette's. He said what was on his mind without a filter. I don't think that's being debated here today. We all know that's true. What's being debated is whether, with 167 hours left until he leaves office, is he a clear and present danger? And he clearly isn't. The president has acted substantially the same for 4 years. He has rallied his base, and he has, in fact, called for peaceful protest, as he did just a few days ago. The fact is, today we are trying to punish the president, at least some are, for 4 years of what he did, not for what happened last week. What happened last week was the result of anarchists who came loaded, prepared, and with weapons. With that, I yield back.
Time has expired. The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Richmond.
The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in my last floor speech in this body to do what I was sworn to do on the first day, to protect and defend the Constitution. President Trump put the domestic terrorists on notice by saying, "Stand back and stand by." He then summoned them to D.C., directed them to march on the Capitol, and then he sat back and watched the insurrection. Some of my colleagues, some of which may well be co-conspirators, in their latest attempt to placate and please this unfit president, suggest that we shouldn't punish Trump for his actions in order to unify the country. That is the climax of foolishness. Let me suggest to them, stand up, man up, woman up, and defend this Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic, including Donald J. Trump. In the first impeachment, Republicans said we didn't need to impeach him because he learned his lesson, so no need to remove him. Well, we said if we didn't remove him, he would do it again.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Simply put, we told you so.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Richmond out.
I reserve.
Gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Arizona, Ms. Lesko.
The gentlewoman from Arizona is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in opposition to the resolution. At a time when our country needs unity, it is concerning that my Democratic colleagues have chosen to begin impeachment proceedings against a president with just 7 days left in office. All legal challenges have been exhausted. Congress has certified electors over objections, and Joe Biden will be the next president of the United States. President Trump has indicated he will peacefully transfer power to President-elect Biden next week. So why pursue impeachment just 1 week before he leaves office? I've heard my colleagues on the other side of the aisle say they have to impeach the president because he is too dangerous to stay in power. Yet they know that it is impossible for the Senate to remove him before his term expires. So what is the point? This move sets a dangerous precedent for our nation. If Congress is going to impeach a president, it must not only be done after intense debate and deliberation, not rushed through in the 11th hour to make a political point. This impeachment attempt is dangerous for our country and has far-reaching implications for our future. And with that, Madam Speaker, I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from New York, Mr. Jeffries.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I did not come to Congress to impeach Donald Trump, but the constitutional crimes by an out-of-control president inspired by his hatred and the big lie that he told cannot be ignored. Donald Trump is a living, breathing, impeachable offense. It is what it is. The violent attack on the U.S. Capitol was an act of insurrection incited by Donald Trump. He is a clear and present danger to the health, safety, and well-being of the American people, and that is why this impeachment is necessary on the House floor for a second time with a bipartisan majority. Violence will not win. Insurrection will not win. Sedition will not win. Terror will not win. Lawlessness will not win. Mob rule will not win. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Democracy will
The gentleman's
prevail.
time has expired. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, we reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from New York.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Aguilar.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On January 3rd, we stood here on this floor and swore an oath to defend our Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic. 3 days later, that oath was put to the test when a violent mob tried to break down those doors to stop us from performing our constitutional duty. This mob was not without a leader. On that day, the president told them to walk to this Capitol 16 blocks from where he stood. They were radicalized by his lies and conspiracy theories he spent months fueling, many of which I've heard on this floor the last week. He needed to say only 2 words to end the violence: I concede, because that's what leaders do in a democracy, because that's what we do in the United States. They put politics aside and put country first. And as I look to our colleagues over on the other side, I wonder how many of them will demonstrate that leadership and join us in holding President Trump accountable for inciting this deadly attack. How many will uphold our oath and put our country first to defend this Constitution from the threat in the White House? To do anything less is to turn your back on the oath altogether. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, we continue to reserve.
The gentleman from Ohio continues to reserve. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Cicilline.
The gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Cicilline, is recognized for 3 minutes.
Madam Speaker, for more than 220 years since George Washington yielded the presidency to John Adams, the peaceful transfer of power has been a hallmark of our democracy. In this country, the will of the American people reigns supreme over the ambitions of any individual. Every single president has honored and upheld these principles until now. Donald Trump lost his bid for re-election last November. It was a free and fair election. In fact, President Trump's own election security director called it the most secure election in U.S. history. But for 2 months now, Donald Trump has refused to accept the will of the American people. Over and over again, he's told his supporters he didn't really lose. The election was stolen from him and from them. And as they grew angrier and angrier over this perceived injustice, he told them there was still a way to keep him in power. So as Congress prepared to meet for the sacred ritual of certifying the results of the presidential election, the president made his move. He directed his supporters to travel to Washington for a rally to stop the steal. They did. He then, once assembled, he had one final request: march on the U.S. Capitol, do what it takes to help me hold on to power. We will never give up. We will never concede, he told them. If you don't fight like hell, he warned, you're not going to have a country anymore. The people on the ellipse that day heard his message loud and clear. They answered his call for insurrection. As the third-ranking Republican in this chamber put it, he summoned the mob, assembled the mob, and lit the flame of this attack. Armed with guns, pipe bombs, bats, shields, zip ties, and more, they set their sights on the U.S. Capitol. They stormed the citadel of our democracy. Hundreds of domestic terrorists did what Donald Trump wanted them to do. They seized the Capitol and tried to end our country's 234-year experiment in democracy, as the Trump family and White House aides watched gleefully on television. They searched the halls of this building for the vice president, who they came to hang for treason. They overran the office of the speaker, who they came to assassinate. They sought above all else to seize control of our government in the name of Donald Trump. Let that sink in. The terrorists who stormed this building planned to hang the vice president, kill the speaker, and topple our government. They took down the American flag and replaced it with a Trump flag. I ask my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who are not planning to vote for this article, is this the kind of country you want to live in? What are you going to tell your children and grandchildren when they ask what you did in this moment? Did you stand for the republic or for this president? Heed the words of Abraham Lincoln, the first Republican president who told our country that a house divided against itself cannot stand. This great house in which he served cannot and will not endure if we do not stand together now. The president and the terrorists who stormed these halls last Wednesday did not succeed in toppling our republic. We must ensure they never do. I implore you to join us in supporting this article, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves his time. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would yield 1 minute to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Van Drew.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 1 minute.
We've been here before. We've done this before. This has failed before. We've fractured our nation using the same process before. Congress must be the glue that starts unifying everyone. By the time this process would conclude, the man they want out of office will no longer even be the president. If we want unity, this is not the way. America was and is the leading light in the world. This proceeding has continued to cloak our nation in darkness. Nearly half the country supports our current president. This takes their voice away. We must be bigger and better than the most base of instincts that have been driving our political discourse. It is destroying us. Let's link arms with one another and begin to heal. Let's stop this impeachment. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Neguse.
The gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you to the chairman. President Trump's actions, encouraging, inciting a mob that stormed the United States Capitol for the sole purpose of stopping the constitutionally mandated counting of electoral votes, cannot go unanswered by this body. He must be impeached. If Congress does not act, if we shrink from our constitutional responsibilities to defend our republic, it will undoubtedly undermine the vision of America as the last best hope of earth, as Abraham Lincoln so eloquently said so many years ago. So to the millions of Americans watching today, I hope you understand that we are proceeding on this path out of love for our country. I will honor my oath today. I will vote for impeachment. And I pray that my colleagues will muster the courage to do the same. And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, we reserve.
Gentleman from Ohio reserves. Gentleman from New York.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Clyburn.
The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for yielding me the time. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of the article of impeachment. Last Wednesday, we gathered to follow the Constitution's simple instruction to count the electoral votes that have been tallied by the states and submitted to us. This president refused to accept those results. Instead, he sought to overturn them by inciting a violent insurrection. But we were not deterred from doing our constitutional duty. Today, we must do our constitutional duty once again. While the president failed in his attempt to upend our democracy last Wednesday's events make clear that if we do not hold him accountable and remove him from power, a future attempt could very well be successful. The survival of our democracy depends on defeated candidates accepting their defeats, as has been the case in every presidential election since 1864. Our January 6th joint session is a vital part of the transfer of power, not the contest for power. Vice President Gore understood this, accepting and certifying the 2000 election result in which he was defeated. Vice President Biden understood this, accepted and certifying this president's victory in the 2016 election. This president's refusal to participate in the peaceful transfer of power and his role in the inciting of the last week's violence pose an existential threat to our constitutional democracy. This threat must be extinguished immediately. This president must be impeached and convicted, and he must be prevented from ever attempting to seize power again. With that, I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Buck.
The gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding time. Madam Speaker, I've heard that President Trump radicalized the group the rioters who stormed this Capitol, and I would say that we need to look no further than ourselves to find out what happened and to look at history. Americans were frustrated when they learned that the FBI was investigating the Trump campaign. They were frustrated to learn that the Obama administration and the DNC had created this false campaign against the Trump administration. They were frustrated, Madam Speaker, when the inauguration of the president was boycotted by over 40 Democrat members of this House. They were frustrated to read in the Washington Post the day after the inauguration, "Let the impeachment begin." They were frustrated when members of this House spoke over and over about impeaching the president days into his administration. And then the socialists in Hollywood joined their allies in Congress. Robert De Niro said that he wanted to punch the president in the face. Madonna thought about blowing up the White House. Kathy Lee Griffin held up a likeness of the president's beheaded head, and nothing was said by my colleagues at that point in time. In fact, one Democrat colleague said that Trump supporters should be harassed wherever they are, in restaurants, on the street, in supermarkets. During this time, the president was under investigation by a special counsel who found no collusion, no conspiracy with Russia. The president's supporters were harassed. Ajit Pai, the head of the FCC, was called a dirty, sneaky Indian. His children were harassed in school. The press secretary, the press secretary, Sarah Sanders, was kicked out of a restaurant for being a Trump employee. The DHS secretary, Kirsten Nelson, harassed